Hello and welcome everybody to my today's presentation about the epistemologies of landscape in the age of deep mediatization. My name is Dr. Maria Faust and I'm from Chemnitz University of Technology. Today I want to introduce you a new research agenda of my new postdoc project, and I'll speak in terms of different research questions I have raised about landscape and space and time, landscape and sensual perception, and landscape and methodologies. And I'll finally give you a conclusion and outlook on what is to come in this new research agenda. So, what is landscape? Landscape historically has been defined in two different strands of definitions. One is the civic classification of a territory. That means a geographical area defined by political boundaries, but it can also be defined as a culturally shaped subjective perception of an area as an aesthetic whole. Nowadays, if we look at our social world, and this does not only imply landscape, but also every other part of social reality we are perceiving, we are increasingly surrounded by an age of mediatization. This means it is an advanced stage of the process in which all elements of our social world are intricately related to digital media and underlying infrastructures. So, what does this mean? Since we've been speaking about the age of deep mediatization, we must presume also landscape is somehow involved in deep mediatization. So, I've identified different research camps. On the one hand, landscape research is often situated in the Anthropocene as it bears witness as places across the globe bear the brunt of human action. Also, there's another research gap that offers some aspects that touch upon deep mediatization and digitalization in terms of landscape research. This implies spatial research on media geographies and geomedia, or temporal research on connectivity in digital detox or digital disconnection. But now we have to ask, if one exposes oneself to the non-mediated, it must be to explore how the sensory win relates to the sensory loss caused by demediatization. In terms of landscape research, there's been Simmel's fundamental essay on the philosophy at landscape, and nowadays landscape is still often approached from an aesthetic and philosophical perspective. But as early as in the mid-90s, research has already discussed the melting of landscape into the cybertextual space with the advent of the internet era, but there wasn't the focus on deep mediatization, of course. Cosgrove notes in the mid-2000s, thus any space is contingent upon the specific objects and processes through which it's constructed and observed. Questions of space become epistemological rather than ontological. And there's another research gap that's more empirically oriented. So we see a case study based landscape research approach which kind of dominates the field, and especially social sciences and humanities address landscape mainly from a qualitative perspective. And in addition, it's not considering deep mediatization. This dominance in certain methodologies requires us to take a more comprehensive stance on the issue. So, for my new project, the overarching research question is, what are the theoretical and methodological epistemologies of landscapes in times of mediatization? Or, to say it in more simple terms, how can we perceive landscape as a natural spatial formation, and how do we come to know about it? That means, what are the epistemologies? And how is our perception of landscape possibly altered through mediatization? And this is a kind of a timely approach of landscape in the 21st century because we are surrounded by an ubiquitous digital media environment. And man's shift to digitalization has almost forgotten its natural origins in the ecosystems of plants and living organisms. Sorry. So we must examine the process of deep mediatization in the Anthropocene from a different angle. And we have to ask, how can it be rediscovered? So, as a first epistemological question, we will tackle space and time. Space and time are two categories that's not only been used in the social sciences and humanities, but also in other STEM disciplines. But here we specifically have to ask how landscape is encountered as non-mediated in space and time. And if we look at the status quo of certain research studies, we especially see that time is often conflicting temporalities, the polychronicity of time from an acceleration perspective, and very similarly, space is also subject to a multitude of spaces, e.g., rural and urban spaces, and the like. And if we apply this to the study of landscape epistemologies, we have to ask, is there anything more to rediscover apart from seasonal change and multiple landscapes? As a second approach to this new research agenda, we have to ask, how do landscape and sensual perception relate to one another? We have six senses: vision, audition, olfaction, equilibrium, gustation, and tactation that are basically features of the human being. But here in this case, we have to ask, what are the epistemologies of sensual perception of landscape under the conditions of deep mediatization? And when we look at the status quo, a lot of research has been done in the field of how landscape is portrayed in the media, or, for example, how through digital media we perceive landscape. For example, if we are on Zoom, certain senses are not involved, or if we are on digital media, and how is it portrayed? This relates a lot to visual communication in media research. But there is an underlying epistemological question to that, basically implying if we spend time, for example, in virtual reality or in the metaverse, and if we use digital media to create artificial landscapes, we must ask, how do we perceive the natural space, this natural spatial formation, with regards to aura and authenticity, if our image is usually dominated by mediated imagery, and how does it change our sensual perception? For example, what happens to our sense of equilibrium if we spend a lot of time on the metaverse, and how do we adjust to it? For example, research has shown that children already have a different sense of equilibrium, or they kind of adjust to it more positively than adults do. And finally, and last but not least, landscape methodologies must also kind of give a more comprehensive picture on research. So, what we see right now in terms of methodology is certain dominance. Thus, we have to ask, considering deep mediatization, what methodological consequences for empirical landscape research arise? We are still kind of like seeing a prevalence in case studies, and especially with regards to qualitative interviewing. Or, on the contrary, there's geomedia research, which takes a huge stance. Um, But we know from as early as the discussion of positivism and Karl Popper that this debate is kind of obsolete and that the road ahead kind of must be a more comprehensive and more inclusive research approach, combining quantitative data with qualitative data and perhaps experience. And nowadays, as you can see on the right hand side, we must also ask how machine learning can contribute to it. So what were we to conclude there? The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And this kind of quotation from Marcel Proust stands pars pro toto for this new research agenda on the epistemologies of landscape in times of deep mediatization. So thank you so much for your attention. Feel free to reach out to me via email for follow-up questions and answers, and I would like to discuss these things with you in more detail, and so feel free to keep in touch. And finally, some selected references that I would like to share with you. Thanks a lot. Bye.